All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about scene size up. As you'll see, scene size up, as the words infer, um, it's your ability when you arrive on scene to do a global survey or look to see just what you're dealing with. Unfortunately, as an EMS provider, you may respond to scenes that are very hostile, that are unsafe, where you may need additional resources, those sort of things. So we're going to talk about scene size up here. The elements of scene size up begin with making sure the scene is safe, making sure that you've taken standard precautions by wearing at least gloves. If it looks like it's going to be bloody, then eye protection, face shield, mask, perhaps even a gown. And then noting the mechanism of injury or the nature of the patient's illness. So is this an injury? And if so, what caused the injury? Sometimes knowing the mechanism of injury can help us determine potential types of injuries the patient may have. Like as an example, if the patient fell on an outstretched arm, there's a good chance that they may have a broken clavicle or a broken wrist. So knowing the mechanism or how the injury occurred, may help us determine what's wrong with the patient. Same holds true with the illness the patient has. If it's a respiratory problem, it could be heart or it could be lung, but it may help you narrow down your possibilities. And then determining the number of patients that you have. If you're dealing with a scene where you have multiple patients, depending on their criticality, you may have to call in other ambulances to help you. And then deciding what additional resources you may need. And by additional resources, we're talking about things like the power company, the fire department, etc. The only predictable thing about emergencies is that they're often unpredictable. And when you respond to an emergency, they can be, fraught with many dangers, whether they be down power lines, leaky gases, toxic chemicals, unsafe traffic, domestic abuse, crime scene, variety of different scenes that you need to make sure are safe before you enter. Now, as far as a motor vehicle collision, as you roll up to a collision scene, look and listen for other emergency units approaching. Look for signs of a collision-related power outage. Look around to see, are the overhead stoplights out? If there are street lights, are they out? Look to see that may indicate there may be a down power line somewhere. Observe traffic flow. Is the flow heavy? Is there plenty of room for you to work? Or do they need to redirect traffic around where you are at? Look for smoke in the direction of the collision scene as you arrive. That may indicate, that the vehicle is on fire or there is a fire somewhere near. When you get within the sight of the scene, look for clues that indicate escaped hazardous materials. That might be, again, multiple people with the same symptoms. That might be dead animals. That might be actually a tanker or a container that has a placard on it that you're able to identify the hazardous material. Look for collision victims on or near the road so that you don't run them over. Look for smoke that is not seen at a distance. And then look for broken utility poles and downed wires. When you're within sight of the scene, be alert for persons walking alongside the road towards a collision, and watch for signals of the police officers and other emergency personnel that may guide or direct you in. As you reach the scene, follow instructions of the person in charge. Don the appropriate protective apparel to include, if you're working at a collision, you may need to be wearing a hard hat. You may need to be wearing some sort of protective bunker coat, but as a minimum, it is required in Iowa law that when you're at the scene of a motor vehicle on a paved road, that you wear an ANSI-approved reflective vest over your coat. Now, around the wreckage of every vehicle collision, there is a danger zone, and you need to establish that. At least 50 feet in all directions is a good working area for you to designate. And when fuel has been spilled, then we need like 100 feet in all directions from the wreckage, and the fuel is considered a danger zone. When a vehicle is on fire, you need to be at least 100 feet in all directions from the vehicle fire. When wires are down, you need to be at least one full span of wires away from the poles to which the broken wires are attached. So you need to be far enough away to the next pole away from where the wires are detached. Know how to use an emergency response guidebook, and later in the course we'll have a discussion on hazardous materials, and when we do that we'll talk about the use of the emergency response guidebook. Now again, I said scenes may be violent scenes, hostile scenes, domestic violence scenes. So you need to evaluate a scene for the threat of violence. As you get out of the vehicle, are you hearing any fighting, cursing, loud voices? Are there any weapons visible, or do you hear any shots being fired? Look for signs of alcohol or other drug use, which may enhance the opportunity for violence. Or is there just unusual silence? When you're at a really busy, hectic scene and you're not hearing a thing, that may be an indicator that something's going on. And then if you go to the scene often for the same problem, then you may know that, yep, we're going there for another domestic dispute, or yep, this is an area of town where there's known to be a lot of fights and those sort of things. Don't get tunnel vision because you've been there before. Keep your mind open, but it may give you a clue. Standard precautions include body substance isolation and use of personal protective equipment, and make sure that you have that on before entering the scene. You want to determine the nature of the call. Why were you called? Is it an injury? Is it an illness? And just because a person is in a motor vehicle collision, or just because a person is sick and is found by somebody, doesn't necessarily mean they want to be treated by EMS or they need to be treated by EMS. You know, a person may witness a motor vehicle collision and immediately call 911, and there's been no real assessment of the patient as to whether or not they even need to be seen. Is it an injury? Is it an illness? And make sure that you get consent before laying hands. The mechanism of injury refers to the forces that are involved that cause the injury. Now, understanding forces, it can predict injury patterns. It can be very useful in helping you predict the type of injuries that your patient may have when involved in a motor vehicle collision. You know, as you look at this particular scene, the windshield is all broken out. And there's a variety of things certainly that could do that. This vehicle could have rolled, and it looks like it did. It either rolled up onto its side or at least rolled over once, which may break the window out. But if the windshield is starred, particularly over the driver's seat or passenger seat, you know that that's usually the result of the patient's head impacting the windshield. Because they may not have been wearing their seatbelt. And that impact on the windshield might lead you to believe that they could have neck or spinal cord injuries. When a person's in a head-on collision, they're going to take one of two paths. They're either going to go up and over, where they go up and over the steering wheel and impact their head on the windshield. And if the windshield is blown out, they may actually be ejected out of that opening as well. When they go up and over, they can be ejected out of a sunroof, ejected out of a side window. You know, it's just amazing how people can be ejected with that up and over mechanism. Down and under, the patient slides down and under the steering wheel. Their knees impact the dash, shatter the inside of the dash, but also break their knees, fracture their femurs, dislocate their hips, and then their chest and abdomen slams into the steering wheel as well, causing chest and abdominal injuries. When an airbag deploys, certainly that is a good sign that they did have some protection. But as in the case of a person who is rear-ended, if they're rear-ended, the vehicle is going to shoot forward, and if it runs into another vehicle, the airbags may deploy. So you're thinking, oh, well, this patient was just hit from the front, and the airbags may have decreased their likelihood of being injured. But if they were struck from the rear first, then there's a potential for certainly things like whiplash. Here's that starred windshield, that damaged windshield, that when you look at this, you know that that was a head-on collision. The patient went up and over, and their head struck the windshield. Now, with rear-end collision, the vehicle shoots out from underneath them, and their head essentially is a 22-pound bowling ball on a broomstick. It's going to snap back. And as it snaps back, especially if the headrest is not situated properly, it's going to snap back and stretch and tear all the ligaments, causing a whiplash injury of the neck. Side impact, either broadside or T-boned, will cause two types of mechanisms. If it's a T-bone, in other words, the impact is right in the center of the vehicle shoots out from underneath the driver if the impact is on the driver's side, and the passenger is thrown against the driver and can actually crush the driver against the door that's being pushed inward by the vehicle. Expect a lot of potential broken bones on the side of the body where the impact occurred, particularly hips and femurs and ribs, with offset side impact collisions where you just catch the corner of the vehicle, not the direct center. That'll cause the vehicle to spin around in a circle, and if a person isn't belted, certainly the doors may fly open and they may be ejected at that point. Now, rollovers increase the likelihood that you will be ejected, especially if you're not wearing your seatbelt. And if you are ejected, regardless of which type of collision, you have a 300 times greater chance of becoming a fatality. There's a rear-end collision there. The vehicle's going to shoot forward. So you've got the rear-end collision with potential whiplash injury. And then if there's a tree, another vehicle, or something in front of the vehicle as it shoots forward, it's going to hit that. And now you have two impacts. You've got a rear impact and you got a frontal impact. There's a T-bone, good example of a T-bone injury, or a T-bone impact to a vehicle where the vehicle folds in. The driver in that particular case would potentially suffer all kinds of left-sided injury to their body, and if there was a passenger in there that was unbelted, they can slide across and crush the driver against the door. There's a rollover. Each time the vehicle rolls over, that's an impact. So if somebody tells you, it rolled end for end 3 times, that was 3 separate motor vehicle collisions. Or if it rolled over 5 times, that was 5 separate motor vehicle collisions that the person inside there had to absorb. Rotational impacts, that's where they spin. And as this vehicle is spinning out of control, it may smack into another vehicle, smack into another tree, but look for the potential for other damage to the vehicle besides where it was where it was initially impact, indicating that it hit or ran into something else. Now, with a fall, typically anymore, they say if a person has a same level fall, that's usually not a reason for serious life-threatening injury. But if they fall more than 2 stories, or more than a story, and they say a story is somewhere around 12 feet. So if a person falls from a height of 12 feet or more, there certainly is a potential for some serious injury. Children under 15 years, if they fall more than 10 feet or 2 to 3 times their own height, that increases the likelihood of a serious internal injury. And in addition to the fall, you have to consider, did they hit anything on the way down, and what did they land on? Did they land on concrete? Did they land in snow? Did they land in hay? Land in soft sand? That all plays a part in how severe the injury is going to be as well. The other thing to consider is which part of the body landed first during the fall. Typically adults and older children are going to land on their feet, and younger children, because of the size of their heads and the weight of their heads in relationship to the rest of their body, are going to land on their head. So the height from which they fell is important. The surface they landed on is important. The part of the patient that hit the surface first is important. And then did they hit anything on the way down? Now, penetrating trauma is injury that's caused by an object that passes through the skin or breaks the skin, and may end up inside the body. Penetrating trauma can be classified by the velocity of the item that caused the injury, particularly if we're talking ballistics. We have low energy penetrating trauma, middle energy penetrating trauma, and high energy penetrating trauma. With low energy penetrating trauma, that might be the result of an ice pick or a knife wound, where middle velocity trauma would be a handgun, and then high velocity would be a rifle. There we go. Low velocity is a knife. The damage is limited to the area that's penetrated. They may have multiple stab wounds. It's a good idea to know the length of the blade, because typically the blade needs to be at least longer than 3 inches in order to penetrate the body and get into the body cavity to perhaps puncture a lung or lacerate a liver or something like that. So knowing the length of the knife is important. Medium velocity is a handgun or a shotgun, and high velocity is a rifle. And certainly these wounds could be anywhere on the body, and the damage is directly from the size of the projectile. But it's not the size of the bullet that has the greatest impact on the amount of damage caused. It's how fast the bullet is traveling. Because once it hits the body, it immediately begins to slow down. And as the body's tissue slows the bullet down, energy exchange takes place and a huge cavity is formed. If you've ever watched somebody shoot a round into ballistics gel, you can see how it rapidly expands and then collapses. And this is known as cavitation. Other damage occurs as a result of other damage related to high rifle injuries and handgun injuries occurs as a result of the projectile itself, which profile it had when it entered the body. Did it enter the body straight up and down, or did it enter the body in a straight path as it came out of the bullet? Because some bullets will tumble and yaw, some bullets will fragment, some bullets will mushroom, and all of this causes different types of energy transfer and damage. Blunt force trauma is injury caused by a blow that strikes the body but doesn't penetrate the skin or other body tissues. So being struck with a baseball bat is a good example of blunt force trauma. Signs could be subtle and easily overlooked, especially if the patient hasn't bruised yet. And with blunt force trauma, because we don't know the direction or the path that the energy exchange occurred. We just have to have a high index of suspicion based on the mechanism of injury. So as an example, if I relay to you that somebody hit me in the lower part of my back with a baseball bat, and now I have severe flank pain, you would know that that is a blunt force injury and could have damaged the kidney underneath. The nature of illness is the reason that the patient called EMS, and you want to identify that as soon as you possibly can. And if the patient is unresponsive, you might have to scan the scene. You might have to get that information from bystanders or parents. So actively look for any additional patients, such as pedestrians or cyclists, particularly when you go to a motor vehicle collision. If you have just one patient, don't assume that there was only one person in the vehicle. You can get information from bystanders, you can get information from the patient, you can get information from family members, and you certainly can gather information from what the scene looks like as well. So how many patients do you have? Do you have multiple patients with the same symptoms, which would indicate some sort of toxic exposure? Do you have enough resources to manage the number of patients that you have? Technically, or from one person's point of view, it requires one EMT and one ambulance for every critically injured patient. Do you need additional resources like the fire department for a charge line, the fire department to address or deal with the potential of airbag deployment, and in these newer hydrogen cars and these electric cars, being able to shut those off so that you don't get electrocuted or exposed to hydrogen? And then is this a hazardous materials response? And again, we have a whole program dedicated specifically to hazardous scenes. Okay, so in review of the Scene Sizeup chapter, Scene Sizeup is the first part of the patient assessment process. It occurs long before you get to the scene, and it is important to determine what, if any, threats there are to your safety and the safety of your partners when you arrive on scene. Make certain to take standard precautions and glove up. Next, it's important to determine the nature of the call by trying to identify whether this is an illness or an injury, and if it is an injury, how did the injury occur? And then finally, you have to take into account the number of patients that you have and whether or not you need any additional help. Determine what, if any, threats there are to you and your safety as the scene progresses, and make sure to take the appropriate precautions. We've already covered that. I don't know why it's still repeated the same thing all over again. So with that, we have finished up with our Scene Sizeup talk. You have any questions, you know how to get a hold of me. I'll talk to you soon.